Welcome to Dead and Roasted. What can I get you?
This episode reminds me of some lines from a particular song. Out here in the fields, I fight for my meals, but from a very creepy lens. Because there is something out there, and it's ready to do something more like a one-way fight. For some meals, your flesh. This series of stories comes to us from an alleged game warden who has some very creepy stories to share. After working in the wilderness long enough, you're bound to see some of the most messed up and weird stuff imaginable. These are tales from the break room. Hey, what are you doing listening on YouTube? You should be listening to Tales from the Break Room on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app, like the other cool kids. When people hear I'm a game warden, they think I write fishing tickets. I do write fishing tickets, but understand what the job actually is. I work alone, mostly. My district is bigger than some counties. Most of what I do happens at night, off the pavement, and most of the job is walking up on armed men in the dark, asking what they're doing. If it goes bad, my backup is 40 minutes away, if the radio even reaches, which in half my district, it doesn't. Sheriff's deputies have partners and streetlights. I have a flashlight, and however much of the truck I can keep between me and whatever the problem is. The hours aren't great either. Poaching is night work, so warden work is night work too. And after 8 years, I've spent more of my life standing alone in dark timber than anybody I know who isn't also a warden. I guess you get used to it, but you end up missing those normal waking hours. For me, the woods at night have become my office. 99 nights out of 100, the scariest thing out there is a stump that might look like a person a bit, but one quick look with a flashlight, and it's normal. Just a stump again. You feel silly, and then you move on. So, wardens see things from time to time. Every warden I've ever worked with has a story or two he doesn't tell at the banquet. Some of them are about people. Some of them I don't have a category for. Today I'm going to tell you the ones I have. No embellishments, nothing added, just as I experienced them, even if that means some of them sound boring or ridiculous. The Calm Man. I'll start with a person, just in case you might think I'm one of those guys who sees Bigfoot in every shadow. Not necessarily. The scariest thing I've encountered in 8 years had a driver's license. Second year on the job, about 1 a.m, I was sitting dark on a log road watching a bean field that had been getting spotlighted. Spotlighting, if you're not aware, is when you shine a light across a field at night so that you make the deer freeze. Then you shoot them from your truck or wherever. Lazy and illegal. Sure enough, around 1, a truck comes up the county road doing about 10 miles an hour with a handheld light sweeping the field. I let him make 2 passes, then lit him up. Most night hunters, you stop them, and they're either drunk and stupid, or scared and stupid. So you get a lot of apologizing, and a lot of, "my cousin said we could," kind of stuff. But this man was neither. He was an older guy around his 60s, with a clean truck and a calm manner. Up to that point, I'd never once, and still have never seen someone that calm during a stop. It wasn't nervous calmness, like when someone's trying to force themselves to remain calm during a traffic ticket, but actually calm. No cares in the world. He handed me his license before I even asked. He kept both hands on the wheel without being told. He answered every question I had in the same flat but pleasant voice. And he looked at me the whole time with a bit of a smile. He had no rifle in the cab. That was a very strange part. Why was he spotlighting without a rifle or anything to shoot a deer with? Were you telling me this guy's out blinding some deer for fun? Truthfully, that is a thing, but you'd usually see teenagers doing that or really, really young drivers, not someone in his 60s alone. I asked what he was doing out here, and he said to me, "Looking." Just that. I replied, "What are you looking for?" He took a second, looked around, then back to me. whatever's out here. I walked around his truck with my light. The bed was empty except for a shovel, a roll of black plastic sheeting, 2 bags of quicklime, and a coil of rope. And look, every one of those items is legal. Countrymen haul stranger loads than that every day of the week, and a farm truck with lime in it is nothing at all. I wrote him a warning about the light, because shining alone without a weapon is a gray area in the state, and he thanked me, polite as a preacher. He then rolled up his window and drove off at exactly the same speed limit. I sat in my truck after that, and I couldn't put my finger on why my hands didn't want to be still. Nothing on the stop justified it. That's what I'd tell you if I were a rookie. The stop was clean. But I ran his plate again, and I wrote everything down in my own notebook. Not just the citation log, the whole thing. I had never done that before. Something in my head made me do my homework. And 6 years later, it paid off. I saw the man's face on the news. Different part of the state, dealing with a different kind of officer. He had been arrested 3 counties south after a deputy stopped him on a farm road at 2 a.m. The same kind of stop as mine. Taillight or a tag, I can't recall. And that deputy heard something moving in the toolbox bolted in the bed. And that something was a 26-year-old woman from a town along the interstate, luckily alive, taped at the wrists, 11 hours into the worst night anybody has ever lived. Once they apprehended him, they investigated deeper. He had taken and killed 4 women over about 9 years. But they believed the number to be higher. His pattern was interstate exits and rural burial, well off the road, on other people's land, and everybody they were able to find was buried deep with a shovel and dressed with quicklime. I called the tip line the day it aired. A detective drove 3 hours to photograph my notebook, and this is why. My stop and the date at that milepost fell 19 days after a waitress named in the case went missing 100 miles east, and 11 miles from where a hunter's dog would eventually find her 4 years later, buried with lime on a timber lease. 19 days after, 11 miles away, shovel, plastic, lime, and a rope in an empty bed at 1 a.m., and the man only told me he was looking. I think when I saw that man that day, that woman was back there. Or maybe he was going back to visit, to make sure she was still buried. But before the detective left that day, he asked me, "Did he seem off to you that day?" And I had to tell him no. He really didn't seem off at all. And that's what's so messed up about it. The guy seemed like the most relaxed man in the country, seemingly out for a drive. Remember, everyone, the most dangerous ones are the ones that seem the most comfortable. The pond. This one has no people in it, and no ending. It's just sort of a thing I saw. During my 3rd year in January, there was a hard cold snap down in the teens, which for us in this area is rare. I was coming back from a duck blind complaint about 2 in the morning, cutting across a lease road that runs between a cattle pond and a big block of hardwood bottoms. When my headlights swept over the pond, I had to stop, because that pond was full of deer. Standing in it, 11 of them, does and young ones, out in a cattle pond in 14-degree weather, belly deep, eyes skimmed up around their legs. Deer will get into water to escape dogs or to beat the heat, but that's in the summer. I was astounded to see deer standing in ice-cold water in January, as if they all had death wishes. It would take the fat right off of them, or just kill them. They were all facing the same direction away from me toward the bottoms, every head up and every ear forward. Not one of them looked at my truck, despite the noise and the light. For reference, I had a spotlight and a diesel engine 50 yards away, and not one of those animals turned their head. Anybody who has spent 10 minutes around white-tailed deer knows how wrong that is. A deer that ignores a truck at night is a deer whose attention is fully spent on something that it's ranking higher in its head than the truck, or hell, higher than man. I put my light on the tree line where they were looking. I was curious. Pines first, then the hardwoods behind, trunks as far as I could see, eventually turning black. Nothing. No eyeshine at all. And the woods at night are usually a Christmas tree of eyeshine, thanks to all the coons, possums, and some spiders even do it. That whole tree line gave me back nothing, which I noticed immediately, and got the spooks. I sat there for 15 minutes, and those deer stood in the ice just watching the woods the entire time. I stayed in my truck and watched them. Nothing happened. Eventually, I was getting tired, so I just drove home. The next morning, I went back on my way in. The deer were gone. I walked over the tree line for a quarter mile looking for their tracks or a kill site or any signs of anything happening over here. But it was all clean. Whatever they had ranked higher on the food chain than man, it had never stepped out where the mud could take a print. Or if it did, it had done so farther than I walked. And to be honest, I didn't walk very far in. I had the whole day ahead of me, and daylight all around, and I still didn't want to be back there. Though I couldn't have told you exactly why. I got back in my truck feeling a little foolish and drove to work. The cold snap broke 2 days later, and that's it for that one. 11 deer chose icy water over the woods for one whole night, and I never found out why. Don't answer. This one isn't mine. It belongs to the man who trained me, and I'm going to call him Norb. So first, let me tell you about Norb. Norb had been a warden 26 years when I rode with him. He was the least superstitious man I ever met in a uniform. He didn't believe in luck or ghosts, and he thought turkey hunters who wore charms were funny people. He believed in scent control, chain of custody, and keeping your truck clean. If Norb told you the creek was running high, well, the creek was running high. My first month, we were eating gas station chicken on a tailgate. He was giving me the real orientation, the stuff that isn't spoken of in the academy. Where to buy tires, which judge would actually stick a poacher and which one hunted with them, which landowners would lie to you and which would lie for you. The good practical stuff. And at the end of it, no change in his voice at all, same tone as the tires, he said, "One more. If you're ever in the timber after dark and you hear your name, you know your radio's been quiet. Don't answer it. Just walk out to the truck." I laughed at that, but he didn't. I said something like, "What do you mean?" He took a bite of chicken and said it again, plainer. Sometimes at night, in certain parts of the district, a man working alone will hear his name called out. Not shouted or screamed, but called real easy-like. As if someone who knows you is trying to get your attention. Might be a single time, could be 3 times, who knows. And the rule, which he had gotten from the man who trained him 30 years before there was a website to read the stuff on, was you don't answer it. You don't go look. You don't run either. Instead, you walk back to your truck, like you forgot your wallet or something. I asked if it ever happened to him. He said twice. Once in 1989, and once about 10 years ago. Both times in the same general stretch of country, which he named, and I'm not going to repeat. But I will tell you it's a stretch I now work. I asked him what he thought it was, and this practical man, this man who taught me evidence handling, wiped his hands on a napkin, then said, "I think it's something that's learned a word, and likes to see what the word does." Then he balled up that napkin and went back to work. He never brought it up again after that, not for 2 years of riding together. But then again, I didn't ask. I've been working out in the country 8 years now, a lot of it alone and after dark. Now, it hasn't happened to me yet. Every night sound I've ever chased down has been an owl, a fox, a fawn, or a drunk, or at least something explainable. Barred owls especially can produce something awful close to speech. And if you want to sleep tonight, that's a fine place to file Norb's rule away. But I'll tell you what I noticed at Norb's retirement dinner. There were 5 wardens at the table, with over 20 years on, all different generations. And late into the night, I brought up the rule, kind of grinning, expecting to get laughed at. But nobody laughed. Every one of those 5 men was quiet for a full second when the oldest one, a fellow who worked river country, clear on the other end of the state, said, "Walk, don't run," and lifted his beer a little. They changed the subject all at once. 5 careers and 5 different districts, and they all knew the exact second half of a rule that I had not finished saying. The bait pile. 4th year. A landowner tipped us that somebody was baiting deer on the back of a big timber company lease, which is illegal in my state during season. Corn pile, trail scraped in, that entire setup. About 1.25 miles off the nearest road, tucked against a slough. A nice spot, honestly. Whoever built it knew about deer. Baiting cases are sit-and-wait kinds of cases. You can't just kick the corn over. You want the man on it, with a weapon. So I went in before daylight on a Saturday, well before, about 4:30, and I set up in a blowdown 70 yards off the pile with the slough at my back. It was a cold morning, a little fog working off the water. I figured my poacher would slip in low light, and at about 5:40, right on schedule, I heard something coming. I got my camera up, but it wasn't him. I never saw it directly. Here's what happened. The corn pile had deer on it, about 6 or 7 of them, feeding easy in the last of the dark. Something came along the far side of the slough. Heavy, I'd say about 80 yards out, and those deer didn't run. Deer that catch a predator moving take the whole county with them when they go. But these deer stopped feeding. They lifted their heads and walked away, quietly in single file. Not even a single snort. Within a minute, they were out of view. I've watched deer my whole life, and I'd never seen them leave a food source in that fashion. Like men leaving a bar when the wrong crowd walks in. They weren't at all spooked. They had just made up their minds. Those steps kept on along the slough, 2 beat, and I remember arguing with myself about that. Everything heavy out there, you see, is 4 beat. Hogs are 4 and loud, cattle are 4, but a man is 2. But this was way too heavy to be a man. Each step had too much air between it and the next one. It stopped straight across from my blowdown, with the slough and the fog between us. And it stood there, somewhere between 8 and 10 minutes. It didn't make a sound at all. Fog moved on the water. The sky was starting to light up, and I was holding a camera, never once thinking about raising it, because I felt as though I needed to sit still. So I did. You know how it feels when you're on the phone and the other person goes quiet? And you can tell by that kind of quiet that they're still there. The line's open, you can hear the room around them. It was that, across that distance, of fog and black water, at 5:50 in the morning. The line was open. It was still there, and it knew that I was on the other end. I clearly remember going down my list. I'm a professional outdoorsman. Identifying things is my actual job, and I sat there running my list. Hog, no. Cow, no. Horse, man, bear. And the feeling I had about everyone I named was that it came up short. And when my list came up short, I grew more and more unsettled. Past the end of the list, there's just you, the fog, and the fact that something unknown is standing across the water, listening to you not move, probably waiting for you to move. It then walked on north, up the slough, and I listened to it go. When the sun was high, I crossed and looked for the tracks. The ground over there was hard pan and leaf litter. I found scuffed leaves and one flat press in a mud seep, about as long as my boot and wider, with no clean edges, no toes, nothing that I could put a name on. I kicked the corn pile over and wrote the site up, then left. And I never worked that lease alone again. I traded favors to make sure of that. Here's the kicker. We caught our baiter 3 weeks later on camera. We tagged his truck and made the case. Easy. He was a young guy from 2 counties over. When it came time to settle it, his lawyer called, asking if his client could plead by mail. That's a real thing for out-of-county defendants, but I asked the lawyer why. The kid had been driving 90 minutes each way twice a week to poach us, so distance clearly wasn't an issue. The lawyer said his client had told him he wasn't coming back to our county, and he would fight it tooth and nail. So the kid ended up taking the max fine by mail. Cheerfully even, is how the clerk put it. He was in those woods the same mornings I was. I'd bet my boots he had heard the same thing I heard that day, or saw what I didn't. So paying the max by mail was much better to him than one more morning in those woods, or near them for that matter. The reservoir. Rarely, and unfortunately, wardens do body recoveries. Drownings on public water are ours, working alongside the sheriff's dive team. I've been on 14 of them in 8 years. 13 were only sad. Drownings are the worst duty we have. There's nothing spooky about it, but you do have to see families standing on a ramp, watching us drag the water, looking for their loved one. As a quick reminder to anyone listening, wear your vest. You don't want to see your family like that. But regarding that 14th drowning, that was the reservoir. There's a reservoir in my district, a decent size, built in the 50s. The power authority dammed a river valley and moved everybody out. There was a little community down in the deepest part of it, but nothing dramatic happened. This happened all over the country. They logged what they could, tore down or burned most of the structures, moved any graves that actually had markers, and let the water up. The last part is good to remember. They moved the graves that had markers. Company men walking cemetery rows in 1957 decided what counted. Now, everybody around here has always talked about that lake a little differently. I took it as folklore, until I had to work recovery on it. A fisherman had gone out alone on a February morning. His boat was found idling against the riprap that afternoon. The water temperature was in the 40s, so we all knew what we were doing. We were going to be looking for a body. Sonar found a target in about 60 feet, down in the old channel, close to where the maps put the old community that used to be here. The dive team went out the next morning, 2 divers, and the lead was a man named C, mid-50s, a career diver who had pulled people out of the water for 30 years, including from cars, wells, and rivers during floods. Imagine the type of guy who would pull a body out of the water, then munch on a sandwich right after. He was down there 11 minutes. In Blackwater at 60 feet, everything is by feel and by the line. 11 minutes is nothing. They'll grid for an hour. But at the 11-minute mark, his bubbles changed, coming up in a burst, and then he came up himself, too fast, faster than a diver of his experience should ever come up. He was making a sound before his mask cleared the water, kind of like a steady, loud talking with no words in it yet. 3 of us hauled him on the boat, and he crabbed backwards away from the gunwale in full gear until he was against the console. And the first whole sentence he got out, I was only 4 feet away and will swear to the wording in any room, was, "They're standing up." Not he or it, but they. It took a few minutes to get the rest out of him, and what he said in pieces was that he'd come down the line into the soft dark. His light had found the fisherman upright. But that happens occasionally. Bodies in cold water can hang upright. Gases and weight belts and snags can help it happen. A drowned man standing at the bottom. That is a creepy thing to see, yeah, but it can also be a natural thing to see. In fact, C had seen it before. But his light had kept going past that fisherman, and past that dead man in the silt haze at the edge of the beam. There were others, standing. He said he had seen 4, at least 4, spread out, spaced apart at the edge of what the light could do, all upright in the old channel. The last thing he said about it, the thing he said with his mask shoved up on his forehead, was, "The one at the end turned around." Now, here's your boring explanation, and I think it's a pretty good one. That reservoir took in a community and its burial ground, and 1957 record-keeping being what it was, nobody seriously doubted that unmarked graves stayed under that water. And 50 years of current and silt, it can do things I don't want to describe to them. A diver's light in black water at depth, and silt clouds and tree stumps still rooted from the logging days, that can cause a stressed man to see a dead body, and then interpret some stumps as dead bodies, especially if primed by the very same folklore everybody around here grew up on. That explanation covers everything, I think, except for one item, and that one item is C himself, because C had said one of them turned around, and a stump does not turn around. A man who has been diving on stump fields for 30 years does not come up the line like that, over some stumps. The second diver went down with the line and brought the fisherman up, and he worked fast, reporting bottom visibility near zero, and didn't have any further comments. C sat in the truck, and next week, I'm telling you, this guy surrendered his gear. 30 years done after one dive. I've heard he doesn't even fish anymore, and he won't even cross dam roads. He always prefers to take the long ways around now. By the way, that fisherman who drowned went into the water at the north ramp. We recovered him almost 2 miles south, down the old channel, in dead calm February water. There hadn't been a bit of wind that week. No current to speak of, in a reservoir that flat. 2 miles is a long way for a dead man to travel on his own with no help. I put it in my report as drift. My supervisor read it and looked at the map. He looked at me, then signed it, but his eyebrow was raised. Drift. That's the official word, but I don't think it was actually that. The stock trailer. Back to the people-related incidents, probably. In my 6th year, deep summer, almost 4 in the morning, I was running a boat ramp route, and I came up behind a truck and stock trailer on a state highway, with no traffic either direction. The trailer had one taillight out, and his plate lamp was dead. Normally, I'd let the county handle all that, but something about the trailer made me look twice, which was that it was rocking. A loaded stock trailer sways some, but this one was getting hit from inside. You could watch the sheet metal wall flex out. Boom, then again, and the truck would shimmy with it. I lit him up mostly out of curiosity. He pulled over quick and properly. I want to be fair to this man throughout. He never did one illegal thing I could prove. He turned out to be a big fellow around his 50s, wearing overalls, with big, calloused hands. He was sweating a whole lot for a man in an air-conditioned cab. He said he'd been hauling a bull to a buyer. At 4 in the morning, I said. He said the buyer was 3 states off, and he liked to beat the heat, which is true of every cattleman in the summer. That's exactly what they do, for their own sake and the cattle. The whole time we chatted, the trailer boomed. Something in there was hitting the front wall, the wall nearest the truck, over and over, steady with no rhythm to it, and no let-up. Now, a bull in a trailer will bang around, sure, kicking and rocking it, and you'd hear it bawl, which is the word for the typical sound cattle makes. But this thing never bawled. Whatever was putting a shoulder or a skull into that wall hard enough to flex the steel was doing it in complete silence, without bellowing or snorting, not even a hoof scrape, just hitting it and the sounds of springs. I ran my light along the trailer. He had it sided in plywood on the inside, which people do for hogs so they don't tear up the aluminum. Every vent and gap, too, was blocked. Through one seam at the back, I could see the plywood was gouged. Scratches through the grain, high up, 6 feet or better off the trailer floor. I stood there thinking, what part of a bull reaches 6 feet? I asked if I could look inside. He said no. Polite about it, but a flat no. He said the animal was clearly worked up, And if I dropped that gate on the side of a highway, one of us was going to the hospital, and the other one was chasing a bull through the dark. Ladies and gentlemen, that is a very completely reasonable answer. That's what I'd say too. Without paper on the animal being wrong, and his paper was in order, health certificate and everything, I had no lawful way inside that trailer. I wrote him for the taillight. He took the ticket with a hand that wasn't too steady, and he said thank you. Then he said something else that stuck with me. "You would have been in your rights to make me open it." He rolled up the window then and eased out onto the highway, and the booming had stopped by then, sometime in the last minute before he went, and I stood on the shoulder in the dark, wondering if it would hit the side again. 9 days later, a deputy 2 counties east ran across that trailer abandoned on a pipeline right-of-way. Same plate, too. I double-checked. The truck and man were gone. The ticket was never paid. The side gate wasn't opened. Instead, the deputy's report used the word breached. The plywood was in pieces in the grass, and the aluminum skin was peeled away from a hole you could walk through without turning sideways. The metal had been bent outward. All of it outward. There was nothing in the trailer but a smell the deputy could not describe very well, and there was about 40 feet of drag into the brush that quit at the tree line like it had been picked up or disappeared. They never did find the man. Nobody was ever reported missing that matched his appearance. Better yet, the buyer 3 states off didn't even exist at the address on the bill of sale, and the tag number came back to a bull that had died on a farm 4 years before. I wonder to this day what he meant by "within my rights." And the older I get, the less it sounds like a complaint, and the more it sounds like a man saying, "You could have stopped this here, and you didn't. And now someone's fate is sealed." The Stand. This one has nothing strange in it at all. I include it because when people ask me what's the scariest thing I've ever found in the woods, they want the trailer story or the slough story. But I give them this one. Part of the job in the off-season is checking deer stands on public land. Rules do vary, but on our wildlife management areas, you can't leave a permanent stand up year-round. So come spring, we ride the areas and tag or pull what got left. It's pleasant work. You might find stands in dumb places and good places. You find ones that have been in a tree so long the tree has grown clear around the chains. 5 years ago, it was late March. I was working a WMA that runs up against private land. There are farms and homesteads along the boundary. Way up in a white oak just inside the public side, I spotted a ladder stand, a well-built one with camo burlap skirting, and it had clearly been maintained. Somebody's pride and joy, I thought, but left up illegally. A shame. I climbed it to check for a tag, about 18 feet up, but when I got up there, I turned around and sat down where the hunter would sit, and I went cold despite the spring sunshine. There was no shooting lane. Every deer stand faces something, a food plot or a creek crossing, that kind of stuff. This stand faced the boundary fence, and past the fence, a couple 100 yards across a pasture, was a house. A little brick house with a swing set and a trampoline and clothesline. The stand was at the exact height where the pasture eyes stopped mattering, so you could see the whole back of that property. The porch, the yard, the bedroom windows. Sitting where I was sitting with the burlap skirt around me, I was invisible from that house, and I could count the flower pots on the porch rail. Screwed to the tree where a hunter would hang his rangefinder was a length of PVC pipe with a cap, a homemade dry box, and inside was a spiral notebook and a freezer bag. I'll be careful here because this actually became a case. The notebook was about 2/3 full. It was times and days, little entries over what turned out to be 14 months. The time somebody left in the morning, the time a school bus arrived, the time lights went out on the left side of the house, and for whatever reason the left and right sides were tracked separately. There were weather notes, I guess because weather changes people's behaviors. There were never any names, just letters, and it took me a minute of reading in that tree to understand the letters were people. One of the letters, the one with the most entries, was small. The schedule attached to that letter was a school schedule. I've never come down a tree that fast in my life. I'm not sure I could explain the dreadful, disgusting feeling I got crawling down that tree. It wasn't fear of anything in the woods. The woods were fine. The woods were safe, and they had been the whole time for me. But apparently for someone else, there might be something waiting in the woods for them. I backed out of that situation that same afternoon, leaving everything in place. By that evening, the case belonged to the sheriff and the state police. They took it smart and slow. They put a camera on the stand. Not like a game camera, but a real covert rig. Then everybody sat on their hands for 9 days until a man climbed that white oak tree at 4 a.m., like he had done it 100 times, which, per his own notebook, he roughly had. The man was 38 years old. He lived only a few miles away. He had been to that family's church more than once, and he had sold the husband a used tiller the previous spring, and had stood in the same backyard drinking a glass of tea while the kids were on the trampoline. He had one prior from another state from his 20s, a window peeping charge that got pled down to nothing, forgotten about by everybody except him. When they searched his place, the notebook in the tree turned out to not be the only notebook. There was an older one, completely filled, and for a completely different house. The family in that house had moved away 2 years before, and to this day, they probably believe that nothing had ever happened to them. And they found a bag packed with certain gear: duct tape, rope, a box cutter, among other things. I think you get the idea. According to his notebooks, he had a plan for that bag inside of the next 6 weeks. He took a plea deal that keeps him gone into his 70s, and it never made the news bigger than a paragraph, which is how the worst ones tend to go. The family knows what they need to know, which is not all of it, and the little brick house has different people in it now. I've thought a lot about whether to include this story at all, but I do include it for one reason. Everything else in this write-up, you can go your whole life and never brush against, whatever any of it might be. But there are stands like that one in more counties than just mine, and they don't face food plots. The men in them don't need the dark and don't need the deep timber. What they do want and need is for nobody to ever find their stand and to never sit where they sit. Nowadays, I check every stand I find, every single one. And the first thing I do at the top isn't look for a tag. It's to sit down and to look where it looks. The decoy. This is a big one. The one I've told about exactly twice. Once to my wife and once to Norb, actually. Norb is the reason I can tell it at all. He had been the one lying in the ditch next to me, and every time over the years I've started to sand it down in my memory or make it smaller. Norb will catch on and he won't let me do it. Let me explain what a decoy operation is. Road hunting, shooting deer from a vehicle on public road, is illegal and common everywhere. It's dangerous. These are rifles going off across roads near houses. The tool we use to catch people like this is a robotic deer. I'm serious. It's a real thing most states use. Taxidermied whitetail hide over a frame with motors inside. A warden with a remote can turn the head and twitch the tail so it looks alive. You stake it in a field edge visible from a road that's been getting shot up. Then you hide and wait for somebody to stop and poke a rifle out the window at it. It works really well. Road hunters are not sending their best. It was my 7th year, winter. A stretch of road north of my district had been getting hammered. It was the same general country Norb named to me on the tailgate of my first month. The residents had been hearing nighttime shots, and 2 does had been found dead in the ditch rows, and a man's barn cat had been killed by a stray bullet. This is how these things end up if you let them run too long. It's why they're illegal. Norb was 2 years retired and bored. We're allowed to deputize a qualified extra body for sting operations. so I picked him up that evening. It was like old times, thermos and all. We set the decoy in a cut bean field about 80 yards off the road, angled toward it, good and visible in the headlights. We tucked our trucks a quarter mile back on a log road and laid up in the dry ditch grass at the field corner, 60 or 70 yards from the deer. We had a clear view of the road. Cold, clear, with no moon out. Basically a shooting night, Norb called it. By 8, we'd had 2 vehicles pass, slow down, but ultimately behave themselves. A lot of people do that. By 9, it was dead quiet. That big winter quiet where you can hear a dog 2 farms over. At 9:40, I think it was, Norb touched my arm. He pointed then across the field at the far tree line, better than 200 yards off. It took me a second to see it, and what it was a piece of the tree line moving, just on the inside, where the dark stops having shapes. Something was keeping pace along the field, and the reason we could track it all was the stars. It was blocking out the low stars through the trees as it went. You could tell how big it was by how many stars it took, and it took a lot of them, high up, and I remember my brain going, "Why is somebody's horse out here?" I remember how fast that thought went away when it cleared the corner of the timber and started into the open field, upright. Norb's hand closed on my forearm like a pipe wrench. It was on 2 legs. It was dark-colored and tall. I've stood next to basketball players, and it was well past that. The legs were bent all wrong, backwards looking. It moved across the cut field, slowly, but not trying to hide it. A thing walking across open ground at night, like this was its backyard. Maybe it was. And the whole time it was walking towards my decoy. It stopped twice on the way, both times standing dead still, head moving about. Both times I was certain it was reading the wind. It had circled coming out of the trees and was approaching from downwind, the way a hunter or predator does. I was sitting there, watching something stalking my fake deer using the same wind discipline I'd teach a rookie. And there was a rifle in my hands, a good one, but at that moment I was not thinking of it as a solution. It sat in my arms like a forgotten stick. Some part of me had already realized the situation and had concluded that a rifle wasn't going to change enough. On the last 30 yards, it dropped real low. I lost its outline against the far dark. A moment later, it was just there at the decoy, rising up over it, and it hit it. One hit. There was a sound like a fence post coming out of the ground, and the decoy left the ground. That thing was 80 pounds of steel frame, staked 8 inches into December dirt, and it launched sideways 10 or 12 feet, pieces of it going farther than that. Then came the only vocal sound of the entire event. You might expect a howl or something, but it was quiet. A low, short, and disgusted or disappointed sound. A breath through the nose. Something a granddad might do when he saw that his dinner was burnt. It had smelled the deer, stalked the deer, and killed the deer, but gotten hide over a motor, not flesh. And it was very disappointed. It stood over the wreck of my decoy, still. Then the head came up and it turned, looking down the field line. It stopped. It was now looking at us. There's no way it wasn't. 200 and change of open dark between us, with Norb and I flat in ditch grass in full camo, not moving at all, and the wind was in our favor. But I could feel it looking at us. And I mean right at us. Norb agreed, later telling me that he felt the exact same thing, but I knew it then without him telling me. The way his breathing hitched as soon as those eyes landed on us. It was looking at where we were, not around or past us, but at us, and it stared for a long enough time that I began to think that it knew where we were that entire time. The stalk we watched was never for the deer, but it didn't come at us. It turned, still as slow as before, and went back across the field. In moments, the tree line took it, and the stars came back one at a time, low to high, so I know it kept walking upright the entire distance. The two of us lay in that ditch for either 10 minutes or an hour. Then we walked away, over to our trucks. I noticed Norb walking with his head level and even. That deliberate, I'm not gonna run kind of walk, just like he had warned me to do. So I did the same. The next day we came back at noon, together and armed, photographing everything. The decoy frame was bent past what the shop could fix. The tubing still had folded like a drinking straw, and the taxidermied hide had flown dozens of feet away from the frame, torn up in such a way that it made the taxidermist go, "What in the world?" We found impressions in the field dirt, long and deep at the front, but they disappeared at the field edge where the leaf litter started. I photographed them next to my boot. Those photos exist, but they're hidden away in a folder with a case number, attached to an equipment loss report, which read in my own writing, "Decoy destroyed by unknown large animal." That's another one my poor supervisor had to sign. Norb and I ate breakfast at a diner after we shot our photos. We cleaned our plates like they were our last meals. Then we talked. He said to me, "Well, I always figured if I saw it, it'd be an accident. Us stumbling on it, wrong place, wrong time type of thing. But if I could tell you something, is that weren't no accident. It came to a baited field, and it tested the wind. We could barely even see it, but I think it had been watching us." He paid for both our breakfasts. He had never done that since we'd worked together. Then we drove home. The road hunting complaints on that stretch stopped, by the way. That December, they just stopped. Maybe word gets around in a small place like that. And the word going around was not about the game wardens. The license. Not everything out there feels like a threat. I'll tell one of these that was more gentle. There's a WMA in my district with a walk-in area. No vehicles, foot traffic only. It has good squirrel timber and a few old home sites grown up in it. Chimneys still in the trees with daffodils coming up in squares every spring where a yard used to be. Old country gets absorbed like that. Somebody's whole life. 80 years later, it's a lump in the leaves and a warden eating lunch on it. A couple seasons ago, late squirrel season, on a gray afternoon, I was working that walk-in on foot, checking the few hunters scattered through it. Toward the last light, I came up a logging trace, and there was a man walking out ahead of me. An older fellow, with a single-shot .22 over his shoulder and a canvas coat, brush pants. He had 3 squirrels on a wire carrier. I hollered at him and he stopped. He was friendly as could be. We stood and talked a few minutes about the timber. He seemed more familiar with the place than I was. He knew where the white oaks were dropping, and where the spring on the north end had gone all muddy. Hunter talk. I did my job and asked to see his license. He patted around and came out with a paper one. We're plastic now and had been plastic a long time, but the old paper books turn up in Granddad's coat pockets, and I figured that's what I was looking at. An old coat that hadn't been worn in a while, and a man who had grabbed the wrong wallet. It was soft as cloth at the folds. His name, his signature and fountain pen, all in order, and the year printed on it was from back when my father was in grade school. I said something like, "I believe this one's run out on you, sir." He looked at it a good while and said, "I could have swore I bought it this fall." Now here's where you think I'd tell you he just vanished into thin air. But he didn't. Nothing happened. That's the whole point of this one for me. He folded the old license back up careful and put it away. He looked down the trail toward where the parking area was, and the light was starting to go. He said, "Well, I best get on to the house then." I told him, "Yes, sir. Straight home, no detours," playing it as a warning I wasn't actually giving. He smiled at that, like we'd known each other a time, and walked on down the trace. I checked one more hunter at dark, then walked out the same way almost an hour behind him. There was one truck left in the walk-in lot. Mine. That lot has one road in, and I'd have met anybody driving out on it. There's also a sign-in board at the trailhead we ask folks to use. The board had my name and 2 others both accounted for, and both younger men that I'd checked at the creek. There was something off about the whole thing, so I went on to our old license records from that era, which are in microfilm at the State Archive. I had a reason already to be there for a different case. I looked up the name in the fountain pen that I'd seen. He was a real guy, that checked out. He'd bought a license out of the same county general store 50-something years ago, and he refreshed his license every year, year after year, until one year when he didn't, and that's because he had a heart attack and died. In the same timber, back when it was private land, back when the chimney in the trees had an unbroken house under it. The obituary was 1 paragraph, saying he was squirrel hunting when it happened, survived by a wife and daughter. So who or what did I meet out there? Whoever it was, his hands could move paper and hand it to me, and his boots moved through the leaves like a normal man, but the archive said he's from a different time and had been long dead. Well, at least this story wasn't a scary one. Just strange. Whoever he was having a fine afternoon in those woods and had gotten some plump squirrels on his wire. The map. Last one here. Maybe not so much a story as the thing all the stories might be adding up to. Every warden keeps a district map. The official one is in the computer now, but the real one lives in the truck, on paper, marked up in pen. It contains gates and combinations, dog-in-yard warnings, which crossings flood, whose fence styles will hold your weight. 10 years of a district ends up on that map. A few years ago, riding with a warden from another district on a joint detail, I noticed his paper map had a few small marks on it that weren't gates or dogs. They were these little penciled X's, 3 of them, but no legend or key, no notes about it, in the big empty green parts of his country. I asked him what they were. He looked at me a second, and then he said, "Those are places I want someone with me." I thought, makes sense. Later on, I took a look at my own map, and I figured there were 4 of those on mine. I just never thought about marking them. I checked after that, casually over a couple of years at trainings and details, the same easy question when another warden's map was out on his hood. Most of the young guys' maps are clean. Almost none of the old guys' maps were. As for me, the slough on the timber lease is 1. The stretch Norb named on the tailgate is 1. The bean field where we lost that decoy sits inside it, so maybe that's 1 mark, maybe it's 2. The reservoir isn't marked. You can't pencil an X on 60 feet of water. But it's marked in me, you know. The 4th is a place that isn't in this write-up, because nothing has ever happened there. There's not been a story or a sighting or a sound yet. But it's this half section of old-growth bottom where in 8 years, I've never seen a deer track, never heard a bird, never jumped a rabbit, and never once been able to stand for more than a few minutes without every instinct I had telling me to head back to the truck right now. Nothing seemingly lives there, but that will be always my 4th X. Here's what I've come around to, 8 years in, and you can take it or leave it. The job showed me quick that the woods hold more human evil than I ever wanted to know about, and the calm man and the ladder stand are worth more caution than everything else in this write-up combined. I'd be doing you wrong to say otherwise. Lock your doors at night, heck, even during the day, because it's people you want to be scared of. But not only people, just primarily people. I've stood in enough dark timber now to tell you that the country is not all the way mapped. No matter what satellites say, there's a reason the men who work in those woods are quiet about certain places and about certain things. It's not ignorance, it's fear and respect. Reminds me of the way those deer stood still on that pond. Because it was respect for whatever was out there. That's why they didn't run. That's why we're told not to run. Last spring, I got my own rookie to train. A sharp kid, 24 years old, all academy polish. On his first month, I took him to a gas station, bought us some chicken, and dropped the tailgate. I gave him the real orientation like I had gotten. Tires, judges, which landowners lie, and at the end in the same voice as the tires, just like Norb did to me. Word for word, I gave him those warnings, now including what I've learned. And when he laughed at me, I didn't laugh back. Look, no matter how creepy your stories are, no matter how hungry the forest wendigos might be, I still think being a game warden would be a sick job. Like a modern-day sheriff in the Old West, going up against poachers and modern cattle rustler types. And also werewolves or something, but yeah, you get the idea. Let's all meet up one day and become game wardens for a weekend, and see who comes out alive. Good night. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Tales from the Break Room. I've been your host, Darkness Prevails. You can find me on X at Dark Prevails, and you can find my other show if you want more scary stories, especially of the creature and ghostly variety, on the Unexplained Encounters podcast, which is also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. If you have a scary work-related story, send it to me at eeriecast.com/submit. And support the show by subscribing to Eerie.fm. Just a little bit a month, it keeps us afloat, and you get some cool extra content. Thank you. Till next time, everyone, I've got to clock out, but I'll be clocking back in real soon.